Wow. It's a front. It was a front. That was deeply. Okay, we got a second. I'm going to take some antihistamine. So let's see. You guys come right back. I'll be right back. 1 second. Okay. We're back. All right. Hey, Mary, how you doing? I had to take that break. Whew. Okay. Let's give it a second. But I got my book, and I may grab one other because it's really uh, hmm. I'm thinking I might even add some other stuff in here. Do pieces. There's a really good one from way back in the day when these old angry Negroes from way back who had his book talking how mad he was. Okay, let's see. And I told people I wouldn't be long. We in business now, right? We had to like get stuff. Got to get it going on. Wait a second. Where is it? Okay, I'm not going to dig for it. Okay, we're going to get a quorum. I just have retweet this because we in business. I love this. Oh, yes, Lord. Hmm. You know what? I'm going to do something funny. Should I do something funny, sis? I should do something funny. Here it is. Oh, that's what I want. Okay, let's get ready. I feel like introducing something. I do. I feel like introducing something and get in the stack. And I'm going to start with something different because we're going to do the lynching one. But let me start something different just to get warmed up here, just to get my stride in. You know, we got to get a stride to do this reading, right? And so there we go. Let me take a shot. I had some. Okay. I'm going to introduce something different. I told you I'm going to do one thing, but I'm going to do something just because I love sharing information. Because the main part of this is this lynching thing. But I was talking to you about books, and I had 40 people. Why I read books. I'm going to show you what I'm going to do first. There's 7, 9, there are 11 people. Okay, we're going to just do this anyway. This is a book I'm going to read from later, but I'm going to like debut it. This is a very good book, and it fits into why we do reading, why I do this while a lot of people are busy and do something else. So again, I'm going to tell you the title of this book. It's called The South's Long War on Black Literacy, or the short title is Dangerous Learning by Derek W. Black. Dangerous Learning by Derek W. Black. I'm going to simply read the introduction. For the people that missed this, they missed it. On March 3rd, 1862. 41 men and 12 women, all white, huddled along the edge of New York Harbor waiting for a military steamship, the Atlantic, to carry them deep into troubled waters. Though the bustling harbor reflected business as usual. Further south, the country was ripping itself apart. Before they could board the Atlantic, they had to sign oaths of allegiance to the United States. The conflict would soon become a great civil war, testing whether this nation, or any nation so conceived in liberty and so dedicated, can long endure. But on that March morning, President Abraham Lincoln and his allies still saw the conflict through a narrower lens as the unavoidable price of saving the Union. This group of 53 already knew far more was at stake than a mere political union. They carried no muskets, bayonets, or knives. Instead, their bags were packed with Bibles, dictionaries, and reading primers. These Gideonites, as soldiers derisively called them, saw Lincoln's war as a fight for black freedom and believed literacy was the key to unlocking it. Let's stop for 1 second. Gideonites. Have you been in a hotel and seen the Bible there? The Gideons? I didn't even know that that's where this came from. Gideon, the Gideonites. So literacy is a weapon for black freedom. They boarded the Atlantic on the promise that they could participate in an experiment to test black autonomy. A major Union victory in the South Carolina Sea Islands had recently placed 10,000 black people safely behind Union lines. Fewer than a dozen white Southerners remained. Per official Union policy, these black people were contraband of war, a strange netherworld status between free and enslaved. A handful of individuals in the Lincoln administration were pressing for the chance to explore post-war possibilities in these isolated islands. Of course, you know, these are the sea islands that they're taking from everybody, right? President Lincoln signed off on the experiment, but had not uttered a word about emancipation. He was still publicly saying, if I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. Talk like that scared some volunteers away. At a public meeting shortly before the Atlantic's voyage, several missionaries openly worried that Lincoln might return the people of the Sea Islands to slavery in some sort of truce to end the war. Those aboard the Atlantic did not discount this possibility, but the transcendent moral nature of their mission compelled them to act anyway. They believed that if black people could prove themselves worthy of citizenship, they might one day have it. The missionaries' grand hopes rested largely on Brigadier General Edward Pierce. Unabashedly sympathetic to black people's plight, Pierce had recently published an essay in the Atlantic magazine suggesting that the Union should enlist willing black men in the war and prepare the rest for citizenship through education. Treasury Secretary Salmon Chase, Lincoln's rival for the 1860 Republican presidential nomination, handpicked Pierce to oversee contraband affairs in the Sea Islands. Soon after taking the post, Pierce had written to the American Missionary Association asking it to send teachers. Now they were coming. The missionaries in the next 6 days aboard the Atlantic were fraught with danger and uncertainty, though the passengers desperately wanted information. They extracted very little from officers who were more consumed with safe passage along the southern coast, save Fort Monroe, a small island near Norfolk, Virginia, controlled by the enemy. New orders or cannon fire could force them to retreat to New York at any moment. Tensions finally eased on March 9, 1862, when the Atlantic docked in Beaufort, South Carolina, the Sea Islands port of entry. Pierce greeted the passengers with a speech. Quote, never, he told them, did a vessel bear a colony on a nobler mission, not even the Mayflower when she conveyed pilgrims to Plymouth. The unprecedented work that they would undertake deserved the highest of all recognitions ever accorded to angels or to men, in this life or the next. While their white countrymen people thought of black people only as slaves or servants, the missionaries would show blacks and whites to be equal. They would usher in a new birth of freedom in America through black literacy. Standing in their way were 4 decades of Southern efforts to impose ignorance on the region. 2 slave revolts, one in Charleston, South Carolina in 1822, and the other in Southampton, Virginia in 1831, had triggered a war on black literacy that eventually engulfed the entire South. The revolt leaders were highly literate and leveraged the knowledge and communication ability that literacy provided to catalyze their followers between the revolts. A third black man, free and living in the North, had written a manifesto. Pull that out. Maybe I should read some of it. Had written a manifesto and started shipping it into the depths of slavery's empire. He called on black people, free and enslaved, to shake off the mental chains of slavery through education and seize their freedom as their birthright by any means necessary. Of course, they're making reference to David Walker's appeal, and I may read some of this. Hysteria ensued across the South. White leaders were convinced that black literacy was to blame for the black rebellions, and the manifesto would provoke more. Literacy alerted black people to the Congress's slavery debates, sparked notions of revolution, inflated their expectations of a better way of life, and exposed them to contradictory biblical passages that, in the white Southerners' view, would overwhelm their capacity to understand. Remember my slave Bible? They had written a Bible to make black people kiss ass and pick cotton. They had a hardback slave Bible to make black folk kiss their ass. For all of you liars out there that have been told that the Bible made black people slaves, white Southerners, absolutely. The real Bible frightened them. The subhuman Bible for black people, they liked. Bible doesn't make you a slave. Misunderstanding or being mistaught or getting cultic information will make you a slave. Again, literacy alerted black people to Congress's slavery debates, sparked notions of revolution, just reading people, inflated their expectations of a better way of life, and exposed them to contradictory biblical passages that, in white Southerners' view, would overwhelm their capacity to understand. In other words, if you really learn about the Bible and what's going on for yourself, you can't be anyone's slave. The only safe course of action was to keep dangerous information secret. Translation, keep niggas dumb. By the early 1830s, all but a few Southern states had imposed severe sanctions on any enslaved person caught trying to read or write, as well as on any person, white or black, caught teaching them. Some states went further, criminalizing literacy for free black people, too. The punishment for the first offense was 50 lashes. For the second, in some states, it was death. That's right. They used to kill black people for learning how to read or knowing how to read. Nowadays, they've destroyed phonics and all in the schools, so the boys and girls will go to jail or into sex work or drugs or gangs where they can control them. Literacy is deliberately being undermined in our country, and it has been since the late 1960s, following in particular the urban revolts of black people in 1967. Actually, it really started in 65. It's been 60 years of them working steadily to destroy literacy in the Black community. And our stupid hip hop culture and other things, and no good Negro preachers and others have contributed to this ignorance. Again, death. And regardless of what the law dictated, those who held Black people in bondage claimed the right to take more aggressive measures. So, even if the state said just 50 lashes, they could do whatever they wanted to because a slave is property, not a person. They chopped off fingers and hands, burned flesh with hot irons, and beat people within an inch of their lives so that their punishments would serve as to warn everyone that crossed paths with the victims. The hysteria extended to books and newspapers too. For even white people, it was a crime to possess certain text. At first, abolitionist newspapers were banned, but once abolitionist literature was expunged, the governments in the South looked for new villains. Some leaders claimed that all Northern literature, including its magazines and textbooks, was infected with anti-Southern bias that would undermine the Southern way of life. As a replacement, they pushed textbooks. Think about Texas, people. Textbooks. And literature from the South, by the South, and for the South. By the 1830s, a pall of orthodoxy descended over the region, constricting not only Black people's literacy, but white people's access to information. The orthodoxy only grew more belligerent and more unpersuadable and more repressive with time. Yet, despite every manner of oppression and brutality, Black literacy never fully died in the South. Black people did not need missionaries to convince them of literacy's worth. Some had been secretly teaching themselves since the literacy crackdowns. Decades of repression could not extinguish the skills that Black individuals acquired before the crackdowns and passed on to friends and family across the generations. Others had painstakingly taught themselves with stolen books or scraps of paper. As forbidden fruit, secret learning took on special meaning in the enslaved community as the highest ability that a person could wield, so powerful that some thought it was akin to magic. As one of the first missionary teachers wrote, enslaved people in the Sea Islands knew, quote, knew that there was power in letters, close quote. They had seen devastating things, quote, a scrap of writing sent from the master to the overseer, close quote, could do. Days after the Union victory in the Sea Islands, Black people began rekindling the flames of Black literacy. On St. Helena Island, they claimed a brick church that they had built with their own hands for white people a few years earlier to be their schoolhouse. When the missionaries arrived later, they saw Black people pursue education with the passion that the visitors could have never imagined. Black people were eager, as one formerly enslaved woman explained, to put behind them the days of crawling under the house and lie on the ground to hear Massa read the newspaper to the missus. Another recalled they wanted to move beyond memorizing and later repeating, someone who could decode them, the letters of the words that the white people spelled out when they didn't want me to know something. Formerly enslaved mothers wanted their children to go to school as soon as they could walk and were bitterly disappointed that they were not reading by the time they were 3 or 4. One teacher, awestruck by the passion, described those early days of schooling as Black people's first act on coming to the surface, a kind of instinctive head shaking and clearing of the eyes after emerging from the waters. They crossed long distances by foot and boat daily, relocated permanently, and rearranged their schedule to ensure their children could attend school, making the first group of teachers far too small to meet the demand. Schoolrooms were, in the word of one teacher, filled to overflowing with eager, expectant scholars, including their parents. Scenes like this would soon require teachers to abandon places like the brick church for buildings that could accommodate more students, while the Sea Island's commanding officer, General Thomas W. Sherman, saw schooling as necessary to enable blacks to support and govern themselves in the absence and abandonment of their disloyal guardians. Black people saw something deeper. A middle aged woman who arrived at the school with her children, grandchildren, mother, and grandmother, 5 generations of enslaved people, spanning from infancy to 100 years of age, explained it most simply. Quote, "Us want to learn, for we have been in darkness too long, and we're in light. Us want to learn." Close quote. Over the next 3 war-torn years in the Sea Islands and other communities, more teachers arrived, more schools were built, more children and adults learned to read. Black people demonstrated the power of literacy and, with their teachers, laid the foundation for public education in the South. A generation of Black leaders rose from these communities in the years following the war to demand that the South do right by all its people. Though their immediate priority was to remedy the harms of slavery and to elevate Black people to full citizenship, these Black leaders changed life's possibility for all the South's children, Black and white. Poor and working class white children had been, albeit to a much different degree, victims of the slaveocracy's anti education policies, too. During Reconstruction, a region that had long refused to provide public education for anyone suddenly tried to provide it for everyone. Southern states wrote public education obligations into their state constitutions, created new methods to finance the obligation, and exponentially increased the number of children, white and Black, attending school. Yet for all of these gains, Black education was still contested. Old ways of thinking died hard and sometimes not at all. A year after the war's end, Edward Pollard wrote The Lost Cause as a vindication of the honor of the South and declared, "Now a war of ideas is what the South wants to insist on perpetuating. The war may have been decided the restoration of the Union and the excision of slavery, but it did not decide Negro equality or any other issue pertaining to Southern orthodoxy, which Southern people will still cling to, still claim, and still assert in their rights and views. The tamest opposition to Black littered the newspapers with racist rants about Black people's intellectual capacity and maligned the public education system as social engineering designed to use white taxpayers' money to turn Black people against white people. We're hearing this right now, people. The most violent opposition burned Black children's schools, intimidated students, tarred and feathered, and fired shots at their teachers. The resistance understood that the public education system not only symbolized the rebirth of freedom and democracy, but it made it possible. If public education remained free, open, and adequate, it would be a gateway to Black citizenship and a functioning democracy. When anti-literacy thinking returned to power following Reconstruction, it did not end the public education project, but it choked its funding and perverted its mission. In place of schools open to all, Southern constitutions mandated segregation. In the place of equitable funding systems, the states shifted responsibility to local communities and gave white officials the power and encouragement to divert far more funds to white students than Black students. Southern leaders began censoring what was taught in these schools, insisting the war had been about Northern aggression, not slavery, and that the South had treated its slaves well. Any book of history or literature stating the contrary had to be expunged. With the law's blessing, segregated, unequal, and propaganda-based education would remain in place for the better part of a century. A cyclical push and pull around Black literacy and then public education system stretches from the 1820s to today, forming two distinct lines. One line reveals a Black freedom struggle, perpetually anchored in the fight for education. In the antebellum period, Literacy marked the line of freedom practically and psychologically. After the Civil War, education represented a new type of permanent and proponents hoped uncontested freedom citizenship. 20th century civil rights advocates seeking to end the Jim Crow era placed education at the center of a renewed freedom struggle. Just like the Atlantic's missionaries and Reconstruction's Black leaders, they believed that if they ended the educational inequality, full freedom would follow across all aspects of life. The Civil Rights Movement's seminal achievement, Brown versus Board of Education, stating it plainly, echoing Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP's legal team's argument, the Supreme Court wrote, education is perhaps the most important function of state and local governments. Compulsory school attendance laws and great expenditures for education both demonstrate our recognition of the importance of education to our democratic society. It is required in the performance of our most basic public responsibilities, even service in the armed forces. It is the very foundation of good citizenship. Today, it is a principal instrument in awakening a child to cultural values and preparing him for later professional training and helping him to adjust normally to his environment. And these days, it is doubtful that any child may reasonably be expected to succeed in life if he's denied the opportunity of an education. The nation now confronts another racial reckoning, and education is again taking center stage. Reoccurring police violence against Black people sparked the reckoning in 2020, but the focus soon shifted to public schools. Principals, teachers, and counselors increasingly questioned why law and policy had been so inept in addressing the needs of students of color and other disadvantaged students. Rather than wait for state and federal fixes, some educators attempted their own solutions, applying a stricter lens of equity to their own practices, diversifying the curriculum, adopting humane discipline policies, and making their spaces and programs more inclusive. These educators may not yet be in the majority, but they were trying to make Brown's promise real with the tools at their disposal. Some even explicitly situate themselves within Black people's longer freedom struggle, calling their work abolitionist teaching. A second historical line runs alongside the Black freedom struggle, connecting in the 1820s to today. It reveals white people perpetually resisting Black freedom and later Black equality through anti-literacy policies, attacks on public education, segregation, and now censorship. In the antebellum period, the Southern states criminalized Black literacy, limited the movement of Black people who might spread knowledge, banned any literature perceived as seditious, intimidated postal workers and officers that might carry the literature, and started a propaganda campaign to publish purely Southern newspapers and textbooks, which meant literature that reinforced and staunchly defended slavery and all of its tentacles. In the aftermath of the Civil War, these political strains quickly morphed into vigilante violence against Black schools and opposition to the public education project. During Jim Crow, the opposition reclaimed the political power and turned public education against Black equality. 3/4 of a century later, Brown declared this assault unconstitutional, but the reprieve was only partial and short-lived. Much like the Reconstruction era, by the 1970s, violent resistance to school desegregation was reshaping mainstream politics. Having lost the 1960 presidential election on a moderate ticket, a Republican nominee, Richard Nixon, tapped into Southern resistance during his 1968 presidential campaign, speaking directly to the sympathies of Southern delegates to the Republican National Convention. He criticized the practice of desegregation buses, saying that when your child is bused into a strange community, I think you destroy that child. The fault, he argued, rested with the courts. It was their job to interpret the law and not to make the law. Only local school districts were qualified to make decisions about how to best educate students. With that type of talk, Nixon secured the support of staunch segregationists like Senator Strom Thurmond, who had set the length record with his filibuster of a desegregation bill in 1957. By the way, that was recently overtaken by Senator Cory Booker, everyone, within the last, I'd say, 4 weeks. Set the record of filibuster of the desegregation bill in 1957 and flipped the South to the Republican ticket. A lot of people say that people did not switch due to segregation, but that's why people are Republicans down South. Once in the White House, Nixon flipped the Supreme Court too. He handpicked 4 justices whom he would believe would reshape or reverse the Warren Court's approach to school segregation. His appointments paid quick dividends. In 1973, the court held that racially imbalanced schools alone did not warrant a remedy. Plaintiffs had to prove intentional discrimination was the cause of segregation. The next year, another of the court's new evidentiary requirements blocked desegregation remedies that crossed school district boundaries, no matter how segregated that might leave schools. Those 2 holdings severely limited desegregation in the North and paved way for its end in the South. The final nail in the coffin came in 1992, when the demographic shift became a justification for the termination of desegregation orders. By 2004, Brown's 50th anniversary, its gains had been lost, and schools were as racially isolated as they had been when school segregation began in earnest in the late 1960s. Despite the reversal of the mandatory segregation of more recent court decisions limiting even voluntary diversity efforts, white paranoia and hysteria have returned, dominating the daily news with stories of eerily reminiscent of the antebellum period, politicians and ideologues targeting public education and its values as a source of cultural decay. In 2020, President Trump charged schools with spinning a twisted web of lies about the nation's racial history akin to child abuse and announced a counter initiative to ensure patriotic education in schools. When his term ended a few months later, state legislators picked up the baton and banned the supposed teaching of critical race theory or any ideas that would make white students uncomfortable. Within a year, states were challenging public education in ways not seen since the massive resistance to school desegregation. Legislators, governors, and local school districts were taking or considering action to ban books, allow parents to micromanage the education process, encourage families to exit the public school system, fine teachers for teaching objectionable concepts, and eliminate diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. In April 2022, Florida became the first to pass actual legislation in this vein, banning what its governor called wokeness and critical race theory that indoctrinates and discriminates against students, particularly white students. That same month, Chris Rufo, a driving force in the anti-critical race theory legislation across the country, delivered a speech at Hillsdale College, arguing that the ultimate solution to indoctrination was to deconstruct the public education system and replace it with the system of universal school choice in the form of private school vouchers. By October 2023, 18 states, primarily in the South, had passed legislation that restricts how schools teach and talk about race. 6 states also banned or limited diversity, equity, and inclusion programming, either by legislation or executive action. More than half the states operated programs that used public funds to pay the private school tuition of students who opted out of public school. The American Library Association found that 2,571 unique titles were banned or challenged. In 2022 alone, a 40% increase over the previous year. Events at the local level present an uglier picture. Far-right individuals and groups have used outlandish untruths, unruly behavior, and death threats to intimidate school boards, superintendents, principals, and teachers who showed any ambivalence towards their agenda. In just a sampling of districts, Reuters documented 220 instances of threats, intimidation, and violence. School officials or parents in 15 different counties received or witnessed threats they considered serious enough to report to police. Seeking to ward off such vindictiveness, some school districts began censoring and firing teachers accused of disturbing their students' racial mores. In 2021, the occasional firing or statement, however, was not enough to stop the attacks. Frustrated but with what they deemed a school system heading in the wrong direction and denying parents their rights, a group called Moms for Liberty organized to change the balance of power on local school boards. By 2022, the group claimed to have 100,000 members in 42 states and had flipped 17 different districts. In Berkeley County, South Carolina, for instance, Moms for Liberty endorsed to help elect 6 school board members who then fired the district's black superintendent and banned critical race theory within 2 hours of being sworn into office. In their best-selling Battle for the American Mind, Pete Hegseth, this is the alleged cocaine-snorting, woman-raping, abusing current Secretary of Defense, and David Goodwin call on more parents to join the insurgency to save our children from Marxism, racial indoctrination, and anti-religion. Reminiscent of the 1840s when commentators scored textbooks and newspapers for any hint of abolition or northern bias, the current movement sees the enemy's bias hiding everywhere. From kindergarten to the 12th grade, it is, as Hegseth and Goodwin put it, it's a 16,000-hour war for our kids and our country, consistent with the insurgency mentality. By December 2023, Donald Trump was promising, if reelected president in 2024, he would root out Marxist hostility to Judeo-Christian teachings in public schools, terminate the radicals who have infiltrated the Federal Department of Education, abolish teacher tenure, and certify teachers who embrace patriotic values. This environment, a new kind of silence, is falling over the nation's classrooms. On newly sensitive subjects, teachers can't teach, librarians can't share books, and students can't learn, at least not freely at school. As Bernard Powers, the founding director of the College of Charleston Center for the Study of Slavery, said, a teacher who is faced with teaching the causes of the Civil War might have trepidations as to what they can say and what they ought not say. The consequences of getting it wrong would be their losing their job. Rather than helping us find common ground to bridge differences, public education policy is channeling our country's divisions. The historical parallels between these current events and the antebellum period raise disturbing questions. Is educational opportunity for students of color hopelessly constrained by a perpetual cycle of retrenchment? Can reasoned debate replace comforting dogma? Can public education rise above our divided politics and serve its democratic purposes when we need it most? Or will we inevitably succumb to polarization? The quest to rewrite our nation's racial narratives through education, a task envisioned at least a century and a half ago, remains unfinished but not lost. If this book reveals anything, it is no structure for repressing education was ever dominant enough to eliminate human agency. The story of Black literacy and freedom of thought is one of continual tension, with factions competing at every level to secure their vision of the world, or at least carve out a space for it. More specific lessons emerge too. Knowledge truly is power. The power to keep a person enslaved in mind and body, but also the power to resist oppression, the power to seize the reins of self-government, and the power to warp society or reform it. But knowledge, or more precisely literacy, is also food for the soul. As today's world reduces education to test scores, a commodity, job preparation The antebellum period reveals it to be much more. Access to education transformed enslaved and formerly enslaved people's view of the world, its possibilities, and their position in it. As the country fights over young people's education again today, it should take stock of what is at stake, the damage it does when it fails our children, and the danger of politicizing something so essential. History repeated illustrates the imposing or lifting of educational roadblocks as one of the gravest decisions society can make. Decisions made 2 centuries ago still reverberate across generations. What follows are the most salient events in the world of Black literacy, some painful, some inspiring, some almost inevitable. Viewed with a dose of humility, they offer not just a reflection of the past, but a guide to the future. Okay, how y'all like that? That's one of my books that I got that I wanted to. Got this when I was in the hospital, and I'm going to keep this around because we're going to, unless y'all want me to do a little bit more of this. Let's see. But I thought to do that intro. I want to do the Lynch book. Y'all ready? I see y'all beginning to come in, so this is my intro, my gateway drug. I'm gonna read a little bit of this. In fact, I'm gonna share some of this. I'm gonna add a little piece of this. I'm gonna read a little bit of David Walker's appeal before I get to the lynching, because it's gonna be fun. And for all of the people who hate Christianity, this is this disgusting thing among real Christianity, not the fake. You're ignorant so-and-sos, Black folks who don't know the real from the bad. You're pathetic. Okay, and so if you hear the language of people who died for your asses, they're not talking about Juju and they're not talking about Muhammad. Okay, I'm not saying believe what you want, but don't try to change. Don't do the same thing that book was talking about. White racist slaveocracy people did. Don't do it in your own culture, pretending stuff isn't what it is because you have a certain bias. That's just it's stupid. So I'm going to do a little bit of David Walker's appeal because the little lynching things are short pieces. And this is David Walker's appeal to the colored citizens of the world. And this was written way back by 1827. It scared the shit out of people. It was written September 28th, 1829. And then it was revised again in 1830. And so this is a limited edition. So let me see. I'm going to read the preface to the third edition and some more, so you can hear what folk were saying. This is David Walker. It will be recollected that I, in the first edition of my appeal, promised to demonstrate in the course of which vis-a-vis in the course of my appeal to the satisfaction of the most incredulous mind, that we colored people of these United States are the most wretched, degraded, and abject beings that ever lived since the world began, down to the present day, and that the white Christians of America who hold us in slavery, or more properly speaking, pretenders to Christianity, treat us more cruel and more barbarous than any heathen nation did any people whom it had subjected or reduced to the same condition, that the Americans, who are notwithstanding looking for the millennium day, have us. All I ask is for a candid and careful perusal of this third and last edition of my appeal, where the world may see that we, blacks, listen to this, blacks or colored people, are treated more cruel by the white Christians of America than the devils themselves ever treated a set of men, women, or children on this earth. It is expected that all colored men, women, and children who are not deceitful, abject, and servile to resist the cruelties and murders inflicted upon us by the white slaveholders, our enemies by nature. Of every nation, language, and tongue under heaven will try to procure a copy of this appeal, read it, or get someone to read it to them, for it is designed more particularly for them. Let them remember that though our cruel oppressors and murderers may, if possible, treat us more cruel, as did Pharaoh did the children of Israel, yet the God of the Ethiopians has been pleased to hear our moans in consequence of oppression, and the day of our redemption from abject wretchedness draweth near, when we shall be enabled, in the most extended sense of the word, to stretch forth our hands to the Lord our God. But there must be a willingness on our part for God to do these things for us, for we may be assured that he will not take us by the hair of our heads against our will and desire, and drag us from our very mean, low, abject condition. My dearly beloved brethren and fellow citizens, having traveled over a considerable portion of these United States, and having in the course of my travels taken the most accurate observations of things as they exist, the result of my observations has warranted the full and unshaken conviction that we, colored people of these United States, are the most degraded, wretched, and abject set of human beings that ever lived since the world began. And I pray that God, that none like us ever may live again until time shall be no more. They tell us of the Israelites in Egypt, the Helots in Sparta, and of the Roman slaves, which last were made up of almost every nation under heaven, whose suffering under those ancient and heathen nations were in comparison with ours, under this enlightened and Christian nation, no more than a cipher, or in other words, those heathen nations of antiquity had but a little more among them than the name and form of slavery, while the wretchedness and endless miseries were reserved, apparently, in a fial, to be poured out upon our fathers, ourselves, and our children by white Christian Americans. These positions I shall endeavor, by the help of the Lord, to demonstrate in the course of this appeal, to the satisfaction of the most incredulous mind. And may God Almighty, who is the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, open your hearts to understand and believe the truth. The causes, my brethren, which produce our wretchedness and miseries are so numerous and aggravating that I believe the pen only of a Josephus or a Plutarch can well enumerate and explain them. Upon the subjects, then, of such incomprehensible magnitude, so impenetrable, and so notorious, I shall be obliged to omit a large class and content myself, with giving you an exposition of a few of those, which do indeed rage to such an alarming pitch that they cannot but be a perpetual source of terror and dismay to every reflecting mind. I am fully aware, in making this appeal to my much afflicted, suffering brethren, I shall not only be assailed by those whose greatest earthly desires are to keep us in abject ignorance and wretchedness, and who are in the firm conviction that heaven has designed us and our children to be slaves and beasts of burden to them and their children. I say, I do not only expect to be held up to the public as an ignorant, imprudent, and restless disturber of the public peace by such an avaricious creatures, as well as a mover of insubordination, and perhaps to be put in prison or to death for giving a superficial exposition of our miseries and exposing tyrants. But I am persuaded that many of my brethren, particularly those who are ignorantly in league with the slaveholders or tyrants, who acquire their daily bread by the blood and sweat of their more ignorant brethren, and not a few of those too, he's talking about coons, who are too ignorant to see that an inch beyond their noses, will rise up and call me cursed. Yea, the jealous ones among us will perhaps use more abject subtlety by affirming that this work is not worth perusing, that we are all well situated, and there's no use in trying to better our condition, for we cannot. I will ask one question here. Can our condition be any worse? Can it be any more mean and abject? If there are any changes, will they not be for the better, though they may appear to be for the worst at first? Can they get us any lower? Where can they get us? They are afraid to treat us worse, for they know well the day that they do it, they are gone. But against all accusations which may or can be preferred against me, I appeal to heaven for my motive in writing. Who knows that my object is, if possible, to awaken in the breast of my afflicted, degraded, and slumbering brethren a spirit of spirit of inquiry and investigation respecting our liberties and the wretchedness in this Republican land of liberty. The sources from which our miseries are derived, and on which I shall comment, I shall not combine in one, but shall put them under distinct heads to expose them in their turn, and doing which, keeping the truth on my side, and not departing from the strictest rules of morality, I shall endeavor to penetrate, search out, and lay them open for your inspection. If you cannot or will not profit by them, I shall have done my duty to you, my country, and my God. As the inhuman system of slavery is the source from which most of our miseries proceed, I shall begin with that curse to nations, which has spread terror and devastation through so many nations of antiquity, and which is raging to such a pitch at the present day in Spain and Portugal. It had one tug in England, in France, and in the United States of America, yet the inhabitants thereof did not learn wisdom, and erase it entirely from their dwellings and from all with whom they have to do. The fact is, the labor of slaves comes so cheap to the avaricious usurpers, and is, as they think, of such great utility to the country where it exists, that those who are actuated by sordid avarice only overlook the evils, which will, as sure as the Lord lives, follow after the good. In fact, they are so happy to keep in ignorance and degradation, and to receive the homage and the labor of slaves, they forget that God rules in the armies of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, having his ears continually open to the cries, tears, and groans of his oppressed people, and being a just and holy being, will one day appear fully on behalf of the oppressed and arrest the progress of the avaricious oppressors. For although the destruction of the oppressors God may not affect by the oppressed, yet the Lord our God will bring other destructions upon them. For not unfrequently will he cause them to rise up one against another, to be split and divided, and to oppress each other, and sometimes open hostility with the sword in hand. Some may ask, what is the manner with which united and happy people? Some say it is the cause of the political usurpers, tyrants, oppressors, etc. But has not the Lord an oppressed and suffering people among them? Does the Lord condescend their cries and to see their tears and the consequence of oppression? Will he let oppressors rest comfortably and happy always? Will he not cause the very children of the oppressors to rise up against them and ofttimes put them to death? God works his ways and his wonders to perform. I will not here speak of the destruction which the Lord brought upon Egypt, and consequences of the oppression and consequent groans of the oppressed, of the hundreds and thousands of Egyptians whom God hurled in the Red Sea for afflicting his people in their land, of the Lord suffering the people of Sparta and Laodamon, and the land of the truly famous Lycurgus. Nor have I time to comment upon the cause that produced the fierceness in which Sulla usurped the title and absolutely acted as dictator of the Roman people, the conspiracy of Catiline, the conspiracy against the murder of Caesar in the Senate House, the spirit with which Mark Antony made himself master of the Commonwealth, his associating Octavius and Lepidus with himself in power, and their dividing the province of Rome among themselves. Their attack and defeat on the plains of Philippi, of the last defenders of their liberty, Brutus and Cassius, the tyranny of Tiberius, and from him to the final overthrow of Constantinople by the Turkish Sultan Muhammad II, A.D. 1453. I say I shall not take up the time to speak of the causes which produce so much wretchedness and massacre among those heathen nations, for I am aware that you know too well that God is just as well as merciful. I shall call your attention a few moments to the Christian nation, the Spaniards, while I shall leave almost unnoticed the avaricious and cruel people, the Portuguese, among whom all-hearted Christians and lovers of Jesus Christ must evidently see of the judgments of God displayed. To show the judgments of God against the Spaniards, I shall occupy a little time, leaving plenty of room for a candid and unprejudiced to reflect. All persons who are acquainted with history, particularly the Bible, who are not blinded by the God of this world and are not actuated solely by avarice, who are able to lay aside prejudice long enough to view candidly and partially things as they are and probably will be, who are willing to admit that God made man to serve him alone, and that man should have no other Lord or lords but himself, that God Almighty is the sole proprietor or master of the whole human family, and will not, on any consideration, admit of a colleague being unwilling to divide his glory with another, and who can despise with prejudice long enough to admit that we are men, notwithstanding our prominent noses and woolly heads, and believe that we feel for our fathers, mothers, wives, children, as well as the whites do for theirs. I say, all who are permitted to see and believe these things can easily recognize the judgment of God among the Spaniards. Though others may lay the cause the fierceness with which they cut each other's throats to some other circumstance, yet they who believe in God, that God is a God of justice, will still believe that slavery is the principal cause. While the Spaniards are running about upon the field of battle, cutting each other's throats, has not the Lord afflicted suffering upon a people in the midst of them, whose cries and groans in consequence of oppression are continually pouring into the ears of the God of justice? Would they not cease to cut each other's throats if they could? But how can they? The very support which they drew from the government from the aid them in the perpetuating of such enormities, does it not arise in a great degree from the wretchedness of the victims of oppression among them? And yet they are calling for peace, peace. Will any peace be given to them? Their destruction may indeed be procrastinated a while, but it can continue long, while they are pressing the Lord's people. Ha! Has he not heard the hearts of all men in his hand? Will he suffer one part of his creatures to go on oppressing another like brutes always with impunity, and yet those avaricious wretches are calling for peace? I declare it does not appear to me as though some nations think God is asleep, or that he has made the Africans for nothing else but to dig their mines and work their farms, or they cannot believe history sacred or profane. I ask every man who has a heart and is blessed with the privilege of believing, is not God a God of justice to all his creatures? Do you say he is? If he gives peace and tranquility to tyrants, and permits them to keep our fathers, our mothers, ourselves, and our children in eternal ignorance and wretchedness to support them and their families, would he not be to us a God of justice? I ask, O ye Christians, who hold us and our children and the most abject ignorance and degradation that ever a people were afflicted with since the world began. I say, if God gives you peace and tranquility and suffers you thus to go afflicting us and our children, who have never given you the least provocation, would he be to us a God of justice? If you will allow that we are men who feel for each other, does not the blood of our fathers and us, their children, cry aloud to the Lord of Sabbath against you for the cruelties and murders with which you have and continue to afflict us? But it is time for me to close my remarks on the suburbs and just enter more fully into the interior of this system of cruelty and oppression. What y'all say? Yes, I'm gonna stay here. I'm gonna start back this. When I resume, I'm gonna resume in Article 1. But that's the beginning of David Walker's appeal. I'm gonna come back to Article 1. I want to do my lynching book while I'm fully into it. Comments, thoughts. They're just 6 people. Everybody went to bed early. There must be some sports game. Well, I don't pay attention to sports games. Where's my book on lynching? Where'd I put it? I got so much junk up here. Let me get my lynching book. Yup. Here it is. These are going to be shorter. Wait a minute. That's not the lynching book. Wait 1 second. It's on my sign. Where'd I put it? There. Oh, here it is. There we go. The moment we've been waiting for. The women lynching. I'm going to do some of these. How y'all like this? I'm going to get to talk about lynching. And I'm not going to do all of these, but I'm going to do some of these. It's going to be good. Let me do some of these. I'm going to do the introduction to this. Y'all ready? Y'all ready to talk about women getting lynched? And the feminists don't care. Missing black women being destroyed by Depo-Provera, and the feminists don't care. And God, black women, damn, wake the fuck up. I don't care if I make y'all mad. Shit. And yeah, I'll marry a white woman before I put up with this kind of ignorance. Quote me. Starting on my book, and I'm going to do some of this. I'm going to peruse this. And I'm only going to do the black ones. I'm going to be a bigot. Lynchings of women in the United States. The recorded cases 1851 to 1946 by Kerry Segrave. And please note, they killed plenty and burnt up and dogged lots and lots and lots of black women way before then. Good night, Miss Stroud. I'm going to do the preface introduction, then we're going to start doing these. Preface. This book is about the lynching of women in America over the last almost 100 years, from 1851 to 1946. That was a period dictated because of the lack of material outside of those dates. There have been no documented cases of women being lynched in America since 1946. That's not true, but you know, she's not honest, right? Okay, there've been black women lynched since then. Like that woman whose body was chopped up, remember, within the last 2 years. You know, that's why you have to write your own history. No incidents appear to have been documented in the period of 1800 to 1850. I bet you if I start looking, I'll find them. But then again, you didn't need lynching. The masters and other people killed folks, beat people to death. You just did what you wanted. You wrote it up as you wanted to do it. Okay, lynching primarily occurred amongst people that were free and or once people, when you own people, you could kill them and do what you want, sell them off. Lynching is something that you do when people, you don't own them. For the purpose of this book, lynching is defined as an extrajudicial murder of someone by a mob, defined herein as 3 or more people. For a variety of reasons, victims were sometimes taken out of jail cells or removed from the custody of law enforcement officials with justice denied or suborned. Often the lynching was to reinforce something vague and undefined, such as social norms. Often the lynching was to maintain the status quo, as when whites lynched blacks to maintain and reinforce their position of power and dominance, and what they saw as the inferiority of the black race. And most lynchings fell in the category. Almost all the lynchers were white, and about 78% of the reported lynchings victims were black. In order for a case to be included in this book, it had to appear on one of several sources, the most important being the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples list, or on the lynching calendar available on the Autopus website. Other sources were used in the various online newspaper databases, such as the ProQuest series on historical newspapers, which included the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Los Angeles Times, the Washington Post, the Atlanta Constitution, and the Chicago Defender, among others. Mind you, black newspapers wouldn't have wanted to publish that because they'd come after them. They don't really know. This is what you can get. Understand. Always assume whatever number they have, it's 2, 3, 4, 10 times as many. Also search for various state historical newspapers and databases available online, such as the Missouri State Historical Newspaper website and similar websites for Utah, Colorado, and others. Also used were individual newspaper online historical, such as the Brooklyn Eagle, as well as, I'm going to skip this. Okay, good. Introduction. To condemn and punish by lynch law was a practice that came to the United States in the late 1700s. In those early years, the infliction of punishment was usually limited to such things as whipping, tarring, and feathering, or the like. Fairly soon, though, to lynch someone meant to inflict only one type of punishment to the victim, capital punishment. The Old English Dictionary, second edition, defined lynch law as the practice of inflicting summary punishment upon an offender by a self-constituted court armed with no legal authority, but limited to how the summary execution. According to the entry, the origin of the term had not been determined. It was often stated that the expression arose from the activities of Charles Lynch, a justice of the peace in Virginia, who in 1782 was indemnified by the Act of Virginia Assembly for having illegally fined and imprisoned certain Tories in 1780. However, Mr. Albert Matthews was said to have shown that there was no evidence to show that Charles Lynch ever concerned in such acts as those from 1718 onward were designated as lynch laws. It was possible that the perpetrators of those acts may have claimed that the infliction of punishment not sanctioned by the laws of the nation, they were following the example of Lynch, or there may have been some other man of that name who organized or was an organizer of such activities. Such speculated the term was derived from the name of Lynch Creek in South Carolina, which was known to have had in 1768 a meeting place of regulators, a band of men whose objective was to supply what they perceived as lacking in the Carolinas, a regular administration of criminal justice who committed many acts of violence, and those suspected of Toryism. As far as the Oxford English Dictionary is concerned, particulars supplied by an A. Ellicott, along with evidence, clearly established the fact that the originator of the lynch law was Captain William Lynch of Pittsylvania, Virginia. According to Ellicott, the self-created judicial tribunal was first organized in the state of Virginia about the year 1776. My God. With another piece of evidence giving the date definitively as 1780. According to the the Oxford English Dictionary, the first public appearance of the term lynch law came in 1811, then in 1817, and then in 1819, referring mostly to things that happened in the late 1700s. The lynchment associated with the purpose for punishing crimes in a summary way, without tedious technical forms of our court's justice, went the 1811 reference. Related terms such as lynch or lyncher or lynch mob or judge lynch, a general description of the practice, all made their first appearance in print in the mid to late 1830s, and the online historical newspaper database, Newspaper Online, which has at least some materials going back to the end of the 1700s. The first appearance of such terms were in 1835 and 1836. In the 18th century, Pittsylvania County was plagued by criminals who could not be dealt with by the courts, which were too remote. That led to an agreement to punish such criminals without due process of law. Both the practice and punishment came to be called lynch law after Captain William Lynch, who reportedly drew up a compact on September 22nd, 1780, with a group of his neighbors, stating that Pennsylvania had sustained great and intolerable losses by a set of lawless men that have hitherto escaped the civil power with impunity. Those who signed the compact agreed to respond to reports of criminality in their area by confronting the person or persons suspected of a crime. And if they did not desist from their evil practices, we will inflict such a corporal punishment on him or them as to all of us seem adequate to the crime committed or the damage sustained. If lynching became a method of punishing alleged suspects for specific crimes, that is, a dispensing of justice where officially constituted justice was deemed non-existent or too slow, it quickly changed into something else. It changed from a non-capital capital punishment, and it moved away from punishing people for specific misdeeds to a practice that was mostly existed to reinforce social norms such as racism in the South, and to help various social classes maintain and impose their views and beliefs on other classes, the outgroups. In the end of the practice, lynching was no longer about supplying justice when it was not provided by the state, but it was about power, control, terror, and intimidation. It was about rage and hate, and the unleashing of all that was bestial in humankind. Writing in the Criminal Justice Review, David V. Baker looked at Black female executions and historical content and found the lynching of women had an antecedent in legal execution of female slaves. Beginning with the execution of Massachusetts of Maria, a young slave woman, for arson and murder in 1681, the officials executed 58 slave women before 1790 and 126 women from 1790 to emancipation. That is 3 times as many slave women that were executed in antebellum slavery as in colonial slavery. Of the 109 slave women executed for murder, where historical records sufficiently identified the victims, 67 murdered a family member of their master's family, and 35 murdered unrelated victims. White people constituted more than 95% of the victims of slaves condemned to hang in colonial Virginia. An example was Slave Jenny, hanged in chains for poisoning death of her master in Maryland in 1770. It amounted to a punishment of death by starvation. Authorities in Virginia burned alive a slave named Eve. for poisoning her master with the spiked glass of milk. After the execution, officials quartered Eve's body and displayed it in public. Sexual brutality often marked a slave woman's life, and later, after emancipation, it was often visited upon the females who were lynched. Celia, who was judicially executed in Missouri in one such case in the slave era, 70-year-old Robert Newsom bought a 14-year-old Celia and forced sexual relations on her immediately after the purchase, and reportedly one night when Newsom went to Celia's cabin to rape her yet again, she hit him with a piece of wood, killing him instantly. Celia was pregnant for the third time by Newsom and quite ill when Newsom approached her for the last time. On the occasion of her trial, the court was concerned only whether Celia had the right to defend herself against her master's assault. The trial judge declared that she had no such right. As far as the court was concerned, Celia had no sexual rights over her own body because she was Newsom's property, and she should have submitted to the demands of her master. Celia was found guilty of murder and executed by hanging, December 21st, 1855. Baker found that legal and duly constituted jurisdictions executed far fewer black women during Reconstruction than in the colonial and antebellum slavery. Records confirm that 5 black women were hanged for murder between 1866 and 1877, mostly in southern jurisdictions. One incident happened in Kentucky when authorities hung a 12-year-old Eliza in February 1868 for murdering Walter Graves, a 2-year-old white child who was in her care. The babysitter confessed to the killing after the family's white neighbors threatened her with lynching. During the girl's trial, the judge rendered her confession involuntary and inadmissible given the threat she had received. However, a jury still convicted Eliza of murder. By 1866, Southern states had enacted codes to regulate the lives of black people. After 1865, newly emancipated black women swelled the ranks of Southern prison populations, with black females numbering 40 to 70% of all women committed to Southern penitentiaries, contributing to the reduced legal executions of black women during Reconstruction, argued Baker. Was an increase in white violence against black people as a means of imposing punishment. Black lynchings became commonplace during Reconstruction, he wrote. Racial violence was a pervasive feature of everyday life for black people during that period, with Southern whites employing the activities of vigilante groups to terrorize blacks. Thus, the assault, murder, lynching, and politically repression and execution of black people continued through Reconstruction. And Baker's view, the vulnerability of black women to white male sexual violence was greater in the postbellum period than it had been during slavery. Jim Crow segregation came to dominate as an institutional means of subordinating blacks with the collapse of Reconstruction, and by 1890, Southern society had fully established legal separation of black people. That Jim Crow era ushered in another killing period for black people. Judicial and extrajudicial executions killed more than 8,100 black people in the period, reported Baker. The white justice system killed 4,707 black prisoners, while white lynch mobs killed another 3,445 blacks. The killing of black women was particularly heinous. White mobs lynched white females, but there's no confirmation of this. White female victims suffered the savagery inflicted on black women. I'm sorry. Okay, there's no confirmation that white female victims suffered the savagery inflicted on black women, concluded Baker. Between 1882 and 1968, the Tuskegee Institute recorded 3,437 lynchings of black people and 1,293 lynchings of white people, lynching in the United States. Numbers of the lynchings prior to around 1880 seem to be non-existent, although the totals for these years after seem to be reasonably reliable. Dr. Arthur Rapper was commissioned in 1930 to produce a report on lynching. He found about 3,724 people were lynched in America from 1889 to 1930. Over 80% of those victims were Black. Less than 1/6 had been accused of rape. Practically all of the lynchers were Native whites. The fact that the number of the victims that were tortured, mutilated, dragged, or burned suggests the presence of sadistic tendencies among the lynchers. Of the tens of thousands of lynchers and onlookers, only 49 were indicted and only 4 have been sentenced. More or less, the accurate numbers of lynching exist for later years due to the pioneer work in compiling such records was undertaken by the NAACP and was found in the publication of 30 Years of Lynching in the United States. For a period of 1889 to 1918, the NAACP found 3,224 lynching victims across America. 2,522, 78.2% were Black victims, and 702, 21.8% were white victims of lynch mobs. Of the total number of lynchings, 390, 12.1% of the lynchings that took place in the North and West of the nation, while 2,834, 87.9% took place in the South. For that period, the NAACP found a total of 61 females. 0.185% were lynched. 50 of them were Black, 11 were white women. Thus, white males comprised 98.5% of the 702 white victims, while Black men totaled 2,472, 98% of the Black of the 2,522 Black victims. From the NAACP data, women were lynched in the following states in the period from 1889 to 1918. Alabama, 7 Black women were lynched, no whites. Arkansas, 5 Black women were lynched, no whites. Florida, 2 women were lynched, no whites. Georgia, 5 Black women were lynched, no whites. Kentucky, 3 Black women, 1 white woman. Louisiana, 4 Black women, 1 white woman. Mississippi, 11 Black women, 1 white woman. Nebraska, 1 white woman. North Carolina, 1 white woman. Oklahoma, 2 Black women, no white woman. South Carolina, 4 Black women, no white woman. Tennessee, 1 Black woman and 2 white women. In Texas, 6 Black women, 3 white women. And Virginia, no Black woman, 1 white woman. Figures given in the lynching of women were slightly different. According to this source, the total number of women lynched in the United States from 1889 since 1899 was 83, 66 being Black, 17 being white. These victims were spread over 17 states. It goes as follows. Mississippi, 14 Blacks, 1 white. 8 Blacks in Texas, 2 whites. 9 Black women in Alabama, no whites. Georgia, 8 Black women, no whites. Arkansas, 6 Black women, 1 white. South Carolina, 6 Black women, no whites. Louisiana, 4 Black women, 1 white. Tennessee, 3 Black women, 2 whites. Kentucky, 2 Black women and 2 white women. Oklahoma, 2 Black women and 2 white women. Florida, but 3 Black women, no whites. Missouri, 1 Black woman, 1 white woman. North Carolina, 1 white woman, no Black woman. Virginia, 1 white woman, no Black woman. Nebraska, no Black woman, 1 white woman. West Virginia, 1 white woman, no Black woman. Wyoming, 1 white woman, no Black people. Somewhat different statistics were presented for the state of Mississippi. In the lynching of Mississippi, a history 1865 to 1965 by Julius Thompson. For the period from 1890 to 1939, Thompson found 18 Black women and no white women were lynched in Mississippi. The totals by decades that followed between 1890 and 1899, 84 184 black men and 6 black women, 5 white men. Again, 184 black men were lynched, 6 black women were lynched, and 5 white men were lynched. Between 1900 and 1909, 137 black men, 4 black women, 11 white men. 1910 to 1919, 100 black men, 5 black women, 2 white men. 1920 to 1929, 60 black men, 2 black women, 2 white men. 1930 to 1939, 49 black men, 1 black woman, 2 white men. Overall, the entire period, 570 people were lynched in the state, 530 black men, which is 92.9%, black women, 18, 3.1%, and 22 white men, 4%. James Albert Cutler in the lynch law presented different figures as well. During that period, he found a total of 40 black women and 23 white females had been lynched in America. While the lynching of men were pervasive and numbered into the thousands, it was relatively rare for women to be lynched, with the proportion of females lynched roughly being about 2% of the victims. It was rare relatively to lynch a black woman as it was to lynch a white woman. Part of that had likely to do with the place held in society by women. That is, they were viewed as nonviolent, passive, and the moral, ethical centers for humankind, and so forth. It was not fair play for a man to hit a woman, and apparently not fair play to lynch a woman. While black people were treated vilely in America during the period covered by this book, the women, as much as men, the treatment stopped short of lynching most of the time. The fact that women, black and white, were lynched relatively rarely and in the roughly the same proportion by race indicates when it came to lynching gender trumped race apparently. When a woman was lynched, sometimes it generated editorial comment from the newspaper, sometimes expressing rage over such activity and sometimes expressing surprise over the rarity of such a thing. When Charlotte Harris, she 1878, was taken from legal custody by a mob in Rockingham County, Virginia, and lynched. Her murder was decried in many news accounts. It was one of the first lynchings of a female that drew editorial comment, that is, something other than a brief recounting of the facts. Remarking on the case, the Washington Post declared, "The lynching of a woman is the latest novelty in crime. More attention than usual may have been devoted to her case because the first women's rights movement was then in the first half decade of its life was drawing much media coverage. However, not all the observations of the media were critical of Harris's lynching." An editor of the independent newspaper of Helena, Arkansas, noted, "The strong-minded females are continually raving about women being deprived of the rights that men enjoy. They have gained 1 point already. A woman was lynched last week in Virginia, a distinction that hitherto had been accorded to men only." After Miss Cunningham, this is in 1884, and her husband, Michael, were lynched near Ouray, Colorado, an editorial in the Leaderville Daily Herald decried the application of the lynch law in general and added, "The citizens of Ouray have distinguished themselves by the most outrageous and barbarous acts of lawlessness. They have lynched a woman. It is the boast of Americans that women's weakness will shield her from violence at the hand of a true American, except it be commanded into law," continued the editor. "The men of Ouray can find no apology for their brutal conduct by the plea that the woman was guilty. All the world knows the woman may have been coerced by the power of her husband and compelled to do such a thing she herself would naturally revolt. Lynch law was rarely excusable," he argued, "and the application of the law was not so lax in Ouray that the public demanded a mob of strong men should drag a weak, defenseless woman out of jail in the middle of the night and choke her to death like they might a dog." I'm going to skip down. Bob Sims led a gang that clashed with the law around Mobile, Alabama in 1891. And in the first days of 1892, two members of that gang were his daughters, Beatrice Sims and Laura Sims, who most likely were lynched. It was not certain that they were lynched, but the evidence points to that conclusion. In the wake of the reports that two women had been lynched, a journalist wrote, "The South claims to be chivalrous to women beyond any section of the country in Christendom. Yet such things as hanging of a woman by lynch law could have scarcely happened in the North under any circumstances. Not long after the report of the lynching of the two women and their uncle, a terse denial of the murders, which raised more questions than it answered, was issued by a law enforcement official. However, few believed it." I want to get down to here. I want to do some of these cases. Let's do some cases. This is in the hometown of Henry Truman. This person's name is Cheney. October 27th, 1860. In the house of Mrs. Barnes, some 8 miles outside of Fulton, Missouri, lived a female slave identified only as Tenny, who was described on one account of being irascible and dangerous temper, who had frequently been enraged by one member of the Barnes household, an 18-year-old daughter, Susan Jemima Barnes. On Saturday morning, October 27th, 1860, the slave Tenny was sent out to work in the cornfield, and the rest of the Barnes family went off attending a meeting of some sort, leaving Susan alone in the house. Upon returning home that afternoon, the family was horrified to find that Susan had been beaten to death, and the floors and the walls of the dwelling were splattered with blood. The dinner table had been set evidently by Susan, and her knitting work lay disarray on her kitchen floor. Evidence of a violent struggle could be found in the kitchen and other rooms of the house, with a trail of blood and gore also being found going from room to room. Susan was found with her head so beaten and damaged that virtually no bone remained unbroken. Besides a blunt instrument having been used as a weapon, it was believed a knife had also been used on the young woman. A coroner's inquest was held immediately, and Tenny was called before it, and where it was acknowledged that Tenny had had some difficulties with Susan. It was revealed on that day of the murder the slave had changed her dress. Due to her contradictory stories about the reason for changing the garment, suspicion was aroused. Thus, a search of the dress was started, and it was soon discovered hidden in the cornfield, completely covered with blood. That was sufficient evidence for the coroner's inquest to declare that Tenny had murdered Barnes. As well, a bloody and battered shovel was discovered. Reportedly, when Tenny was confronted with the discovered dress, she confessed to the murder. Immediately, she was placed in the custody of Deputy Constable Henry Willing, who rode off with his prisoner towards the jail in Fulton. Willing was worried by the rumblings among the spectators and neighbors that violence was the answer, so he left for the jail at once as fast as he could. However, he wasn't fast enough. A few miles from Fulton, a pursuing mob overtook Willing and his prisoner. The mob demanded Willing hand over his prisoner, and Willing, surrounded, outnumbered, alone, facing a mob of 40 to 50 men, gave the slave Tenny to the crowd. The mob took Tenny to the nearest tree, where they lynched her by hanging her until she was dead. September 10th, 1868, a unidentified black woman was found hung in Northport, Alabama. Miss Cummins, a black woman, September 1868. She was hung with her father and a friend. Black woman lynched with two black men. 1868, Pulaski County, Kentucky. Mrs. Henry Reed and Mrs. Matt Nichols, between October 4th and 8th, 1869. Hmm? Okay, and we'll just run this down. On this date in Jackson County, Florida, Mrs. Henry Reed, uh, her husband, Henry Reed, their son, Mr. Reed, Mrs. Matt Nichols, and she herself, Mr. Nichols, and Mr. Nichols' son. Okay, these were all lynched together. All the above were listed as victims in the lynching calendar. While no specific confirmation was found with respect to the Reed family or the Nichols family, was a reference to Sam Fleischman, also in the lynching calendar, as having been lynched on October 5th, and the general disturbance between blacks and whites that took place around Marianna, Jackson County, Florida. At the time, according to the news report, period from September 20th to October 4th, some half-dozen cold-blooded murders had been committed, and assassinations are the order of the day. Throughout the period, Marianna and the vicinity had been a state of lawlessness. Reportedly, Sam Fleischman, a Republican merchant, had been taken away from his family and business gang by a gang of desperados, carried to the state of Georgia, then forbidden to return under the pain of instant death. About 30 black people were quietly attending a picnic near Marianna when they were fired upon from an ambush. Wyatt Young, a leading colored Republican, and a little son of Benjamin Livingstone were killed in that attack. Colonel McClellan described a leader among the lawless men, and his daughter were sitting in the plaza of the hotel nearby, were fired at by the enraged blacks, with McClellan being seriously wounded and his daughter instantly killed. Armed men shot down at his door a black man named Oscar Greenberry and attacked another black constable who fled to the woods, pursued by an infuriated mob who searched the countryside for him for several days. A loyalist and a black man, while riding along together, were fired upon from the bushes, both being seriously wounded. Many citizens of the area were said to have been compelled to flee for their lives from the attacks of the desperados. Civil officers were described as being powerless to make arrests, to protect the innocent, or punish the guilty, or enforce the laws. It was also reported that the mob scoured the area on foot and horseback, armed to the teeth in numbers ranging from 12 to 30 men, and did not hesitate to shoot down any who incurred their displeasure. On October 13th, Florida Governor Harrison Reed announced a $20,000 reward would be paid for the arrest and conviction of the perpetrators who, on September 28th in Marianna, Florida, fired upon the picnic and killed Wyatt Young and Spencer Livington. September 1870, Miss John Symes, black woman, hung, lynched. Another unidentified black woman, Wilkinson, Georgia, September 13th, 1871, lynched with a white man. At midnight, September 13th, 1871, a party of unknown men gagged and killed Matthew Deason, sheriff of Wilkinson County, Georgia, and a black woman as an employee, and threw their bodies into a mill pond nearby. Their bodies were discovered on Friday morning, at which time it was found that Deason had a gunshot wound in the head, while the remains of the woman give evidence of having been badly mutilated with a knife. Mrs. Samuel Hawkins and Miss Hawkins, so a mother and a daughter alongside husband. Mhm. On Friday night, November 1st, 1872, a band of armed men entered the house of Samuel Hawkins, a black man who lived in the Hickman precinct in Fayette County, Kentucky. The mob took Hawkins, his wife, and his daughter out of the house and in the general direction of the Licking River. It was thought the mob drowned all three in that river. No reason was reported in the media as being the cause of the attack. No verified confirmation of the lynchings was found. Just came in and killed people. I had a judge call me last year to tell me they still come and get black people in the middle of the night in Kentucky. Just pick people up because they want to. We ain't free fools. Mrs. Ben French, she's lynched with her husband in Warsaw, Kentucky, between 11 p.m. and midnight on May 3rd, 1876. Ben French and his wife were taken from the county jail in that city where they had been incarcerated for poisoning an old wealthy black man named Jacob Jones. The couple were taken by a mob of masked men and hanged from the limbs of a tree about 2 miles from town. According to the report, the couple had invited Jones for tea, and while he was eating, Jones was seized with the symptoms of arsenic poisoning. Shortly thereafter, he died. The motive for the murder was thought to be a desire on the part of French's to obtain possession of some of the property owned by Jones. In the words of a reporter, the couple was regarded as bad characters and not probable that any steps would be taken to discover the participants in the hanging. Charlotte Harris, Rockingham County, Virginia, 11 March 1878. The Harris case started on March 10, 1878, when a black boy named Jim Abergast was placed in jail in Rockingham County, Virginia, on the charge of having barn of Mr. Henry Sipe on February 28th. Because of the destruction of this barn, Sipe lost 2 horses, 2 head of cattle, and all of his agricultural implements. Investigation, though, was said to have revealed the fact that the torch was applied at the instigation of a black woman named Charlotte Harris, who was said to have had some grudge against the Sipe family. A warrant was procured for the arrest of Harris, and on that evening, Sipe and others who had set out to find her arrested her and returned with her in custody. They overtook about 2 miles east of Earlyville in Albemarle County. I used to live in Albemarle County. And Harris was taken at once to the magistrate's in Malden, and Arkwright, who conducted preliminary investigation, with the evidence being described as strong against Harris. She was ordered committed to jail. At the conclusion of the examination, the hours being late, the woman was placed under strong guard to be maintained through the night, with Harris being to be transported the following morning to the county jail at Harrisburg. Apparently, she was held in someone's private dwelling or perhaps some public building. The guard was composed of 4 men. Things remained quiet for only a brief period of time because around 11 p.m., 2 men, with their faces blackened, rushed into the building with drawn revolvers and demanded the prisoner be handed over to them. While those 2 groups were talking, there was a sudden rush of many more armed men, all with faces blackened in the building. They seized Harris and dragged her off outside and up the road to some 400 yards to a tree. There, 5 members of the mob bent the tree down, and a rope was attached to them and to the neck of Harris. And as said a reporter, in another instant the tree was let go and the victim was jerked into midair, where in a few minutes she expired and the disguised lynchers disappeared. The reporter added it was an awful penalty for the crime which she had been accused, the like which has hardly been heard of or seen in the civilized community. Well, here's one. Something. Millie Thompson, black. She was lynched with her brother, Bob Thompson, on July 29th, 1880 in Jonesboro, Georgia. On the night of July 29th, 1880 in Jonesboro, Georgia, a black man by the name of Joe Thompson was dragged out of his cabin and severely beaten by a mob of masked men. As well, his wife was seriously beaten, and his 16-year-old son, Bob, was wounded so seriously that he was not expected to live. His married daughter, Millie Thompson, often called Millie Johnson, was shot to death by the same mob. Oh my God, I have family that live here. My favorite cousins live here. Jesus. Judy Metz, black, April 9th, a very important day for me, 1881. On Sunday night, April 3rd, 1881, the barn of Mr. J.S. Blaylock at Martin's Depot, Lawrence County, South Carolina, was set on fire and burned to the ground. So near to the barn was the house that rumor quickly spread that the real purpose of the arson was also to burn down the Blaylock house. Mr. Blaylock conducted his own investigation and convinced himself that the arsonist was a black woman named Judy Metz who lived on his property. On Saturday, April 9th, Blaylock went to see trial Justice N.S. Harris at Clinton, where he swore out a warrant for her arrest. Harris placed the warrant in the hands of Constable Samuel Gray, who arrested Metz around 8 p.m. on a Saturday night and started taking her with him back to Clinton. 2 miles from Martin's Depot, a party of men on horseback overtook the constable and the prisoner. All members of the mob had masks over their faces. Some of the party took charge of the constable, some took charge of the prisoner. 2 groups then rode off in opposite directions. Kerry was held in this section by the mob for about an hour and was told to get, which he did without delay. Returned to Clinton alone the next day. The body of Metz was found about a quarter mile from where the lynchers had taken her. Metz was found hanging from a tree. 1 day later, the coroner's inquest returned a verdict that Metz had come to their death by hanging at the hands of persons unknown to the jury. Harriet Finch. On the night of Monday, September 29th, 1885, 3 black men and 1 black woman, Jerry Finch and his wife Harriet Finch, Lee Tyson, and John Pattisall, were taken from their jail cell in Pittsboro, Chatham County, North Carolina, where they stood accused of the murder of the Finch and Gunther family by a mob and hung from a tree near the public road 1 mile from town. The lynching was viewed as a sequel to the murder of the Finch family in Chatham on the night of July 4th, 1885. Oh my God, I used to live here. This is Jackson, Tennessee, people. Eliza Wood, Jackson, Tennessee. I've lived in Jackson 3-4 years. October 18th, 1886, Eliza Wood, a 70-year-old black woman, was taken from her jail cell in Jackson, Tennessee on the night of August 18th, 1886, and hung by a mob. She was in jail because she was accused of poisoning her employer, Mrs. Jessie Woolen, a white wife of a well-known citizen in the area. She maintained her innocence to the last. According to one account, she had a bad reputation. She was hung from a tree in the courthouse yard. I know where the courthouse is, guys. The mob waited for no more evidence than the fact that the dead woman's stomach contained traces of arsenic before white men seized the prisoner, tore her clothes off, stripped her, put a rope around her neck, and demanded confession. None was forthcoming, and Woods remained silent. The mob dragged her naked through the streets by the neck. While hanging from the tree, Woods was riddled with bullets. Reportedly, sentiments in the community was in sympathy with the act. Despite the behavior of the lynchers, one newspaper report declared the mob was orderly and dispersed quietly. You know, when it's white women, they get a whole lot of detail. When it's a black woman, they're in and out. Okay, this is someone passing. I'm going to skip this. Roxy Elliott, killed in Centerville, Bibb County, Alabama, April 15th, 1891. Roxy Elliott was a black school teacher who gave birth to the illegitimate child around the 1st of April, 1891 in Centerville, Bibb County, Alabama. Her efforts to hide her shame, she carried an infant to a dense thicket where she tied a rope around the newborn's neck and hanged it from a tree, killing it. Later, the child was discovered by passing hunters, and the coroner's investigation brought out the facts of the case. Elliott was placed under arrest no later than April 5th. Other reports of the case appeared in the media, but a listing of the lynching calendar said that Roxy was lynched in Centerville April 15th, 1891. Mother of Wesley Lee. John Barentine, Wesley Lee, Monroe Walters, and the mother of Wesley Lee, all blacks, were hanged by a mob in Lowndes County, Mississippi. That happened around May 1st, 1891. The allegations is that someone tried to poison someone, so they hung all four of them. Hung the boy's mama. Two people, along with their husband, Ella Williams and Eliza Lowe, 7th of August, 1891. On Friday, July 31st, 1891, the residence of William Davis, a prominent farmer in Henry County, Alabama, was burnt to the ground, with the family narrow escaping with their lives. 2 days later, on Sunday, August 2nd, Ella Williams was arrested and confessed to saturating the house with coal oil and setting it on fire. Her confession implicated her husband, William Williams, and the married couple named Willis Lowe and Eliza Lowe. On Friday, August 7th, the other three were arrested while the officers were transporting all four of them to jail. A mob overpowered the officers, seized the prisoners, and shot them to death and threw their bodies into a nearby river. Lou Stevenson, September 27th, 1891. On Saturday night, September 26, 1891, a black woman named Lou Stevenson called a white bartender, John Davis, outside his saloon in Hollandale, Missouri. When Stevenson engaged Davis in a conversation, a black man named Grant White appeared on the scene and shot Davis dead without provocation and for no apparent reason. Lou was detained immediately while White fled the area, only to be quickly captured. Speculation was Stevenson and White conspired to kill Davis, although no motive was reported. When the pair was reunited at the scene of the crime, an infuriated mob hung both White and Stevenson to a railroad bridge. Mrs. Martin. During the period of 1890 to 1891, the celebrated barn burning case had excited Sumner County, Tennessee. 8 blacks and white men were charged with burning barns in the county. One black was lynched by a mob near Henderson. I know where Henderson is. One died before trial, and the remaining 7 were brought to trial in Gallatin. However, that trial ended in a hung jury. The second trial took place in the fall of 1891, with two of the defendants found guilty and sent to the penitentiary. Two of them were given a new trial. The remaining three were acquitted. Among the latter, two black brothers with the surname Martin. The Martins wanted to leave the county for good. However, they returned around Christmas time, 1891. On Tuesday, February 2nd, 1892, the mob went in the cabin where the boys were staying with their mother and ordered them to come out. When the brothers refused to do so, the mob began to fire their weapons through the window and killed Miss Martin, the mother of the two men. Miss Hamp Briscoe, February 10th, 1892, in Keogh, Arkansas. Hamp Briscoe and his wife and son were arrested and placed in a small house in Keogh, Arkansas. All were shot to death by a small group of masked men who stormed into the house on February 10th, 1892. An unidentified black woman was found hanging on the 12th of March, 1892 in Rayville, Louisiana. A lifeless form of a black female was found dangling from a tree on a road leading to Rayville, Louisiana on Saturday, March 12, 1892. It was identified as that of 15-year-old servant of W.R. Helmer, who resided at the Grenville Place some 20 miles from Rayville. Reportedly, the girl became offended at a black man also employed at the same place, and seeking revenge upon this man, decided to put rough on rats, the trade name of a readily available arsenic-based poison that households use to deal with vermin, in his coffee. However, she put the poison in the coffee intended for the family meal. About 9 persons drank and became very ill, although all did recover. When confronted, the service girl alleged she attempted to kill her target, and she did not care particularly who else suffered. On Friday night, few men set out to escort the girl to jail at Rayville, but they had not gone very far when a party of masked men overtook them and strung the girl up from a tree at the first crossing. November 2nd, 1892, in Calhoun Parish, Louisiana. An unidentified black man, unidentified black woman, a father, a black man by the name of John Hastings was arrested and jailed on Saturday, October 29th, 1892, for the murder of Zip Norman of Calhoun Parish, Louisiana. A son of Hastings was killed while resisting arrest at the same time. Then on November 2nd, a daughter and another son of Hastings were both lynched. One account noted that neither had any connection to the Norman murder. A few days later, John Hastings was taken from his jail cell in Jonesville, Louisiana, and by mob and hanged. Mahalia Jackson and Louisa Carter, September 10th, 1893. In early September 1893, Thomas Woodworth, a highly respected citizen of the community, and his 5 children who lived in Quincy, Mississippi, were taken violently ill and 2 of the children died. 2 weeks later, Thomas and others still lingered, but reported to have little hope of recovery. Quincy was 137 miles east of Memphis. Examination of the well on the Woodruff property disclosed 3 packages of Rough on Rats, an arsenic-based pesticide. In it, suspicion pointed to a black man named Ben Jackson, who was arrested. During the inquest that followed, a mob of not masked men took Jackson from the officers at the inquest and hung him. A day later, September 10th, the coroner's jury examined Mahalia Jackson, Ben's wife, and Louisa Lou Carter, his mother-in-law. They both testified to a knowledge of Ben's intention to purchase poison for the purpose of putting it down Woodruff's well, but the jury discharged them nonetheless. Once again, a group of armed men formed up, took 2 women outside and hanged them as participants in the conspiracy. As well, the woman testified that Rufus Broyles A well-known black man in the neighborhood had supplied the money with which to buy the poison. After the first lynching, Broyles hid himself away and avoided detection until September 14th, when he was seen in the community of Woodhall, a few miles from Quincy. Later that day, he was seen again. On that occasion, his dead body was hanging from the limb of a tree. How y'all doing? I can stop here. I'll come back to this, but I don't see no feminism in here. I don't see no women's support. And I haven't even gotten to the 40s or in the 1890s. I want the one back in the 1940s when they string up the black women and shoot the pregnant black lady. I think that's in Douglas, Georgia. I know that's where it is. It has to be. It has to be. A lot of people don't know about these. There are certain areas. My God, I have lived in these places where these lynchings took place. hmm Yep. Monroe, Georgia, 1946. I knew where it was. hmm Wow. Uh, we'll come back to this. I'm going to take a break, but I'm going to be bringing in other short readings and then do more substantial ones. One thing I did want to read from, because I have friends that are legal people, um, I have this book by George McDowell Stroud called A Sketch of the Laws Related to Slavery in Several States of the United States of America. And you'll find some of these things, these laws, some of which are still on the books that they had for black people, are so terrible. People need to understand how bad it is. I used this book for my thesis years ago, and it will be interesting to return to it. Let me see how this breaks down, because I would love to share some of this just for you to hear what they can do to someone. People have no idea how many laws they had where they could just kill you, burn you, chop your ear off. This is all laws here. They'll tell you about medieval Europe. We had that right here. So I want to encourage people get some rest. Tomorrow will be Monday, and I don't know. I'll take a nap, and I may get back up and do some more. I have a whole bunch. I'm far behind, and I will be looking at many things: justice, race, communist. I'll be looking at police, but I'm gonna stop here so we can get back at that. But I hope that was interesting. Lynching of black women, and hmm. And I have another book on black women and Jim Crow and how they framed all the black women, put them in jail. We're going to continue to do this because the only way you can get people to leave feminism is to educate them as to why they need to stop. So I'm going to stop for now. You guys know, come back, share this with somebody, and I'll be doing a lot more, doing pieces and more. All right, let me stop here. We'll reconnect a little bit later today.